how do we get someone to understand something about something they think they already know well? And that's an interesting dilemma.
Welcome back to the Talking Sales series. I'm John Smybert and I've got Mike Adams with me again. Welcome back, Mike.
Thanks, John.
Hey, we've had a series of discussions today, Mike, and thank you very much for that. Right back at the beginning, we talked why are stories so important to the sales process.
Yes.
And thinking sales process, you talked about 3 types of stories.
Or 2 phases, yes.
Yeah, we're 7 stories and each slot into 3 phases.
Yep.
And we talked about connecting, we talked about fighting, and we talked about landing. I'd like to talk about fighting for a little. And there's 3 or 4 stories in that sort. What sort of stories are in the fighting stage?
Yeah, so it sounds a bit aggressive, fight maybe, but we're really fighting for mind share.
This is the area where now we're in the sales process.
We're in the heart of the sale.
The heart of the sales process.
Correct.
In what I call discovery and where you're differentiating, but bring the customer through a thinking journey and all that sort of stuff.
Is this future customer going to change what they were already doing? Are they going to do it with you or someone else? You know, we need to fight for that. So they've got the fish on the hook. We've made a nice connection, but now they're pulling and we've got to fight. So there are 2 stories in this phase. The first is insight, and the second is success stories. So
well, we all talk insight, the old insight selling method or challenger sale and so on and so forth.
Well, insight might be a little bit like the word story in that it gets bandied around a fair bit.
Overused, yeah.
To be a true insight, so my definition of insight is something that your company knows about your market or your particular customer, about their business, that they don't appreciate, but they should. And there's commercial benefit to both of you to that.
Yep.
And therein lies a problem in that definition. How arrogant of you to assume that you know something about your client's business, for a start. That's the first problem. And the second one is, we're talking about something they presumably don't understand. How do we get someone to understand something about something they think they already know well? And that's an interesting dilemma. And the most difficult job in sales is selling where you don't have a success story in a new market, a new product and service, and the only thing you have in that situation is insight. If you don't have insight, you don't have anything to sell.
I agree.
So we need an insight story.
And that insight helps us also differentiate. It helps us do all sorts of stuff to bring the customer through. You're talking about the fishing thing, you're now throwing them through.
Well, the first problem with insight is, how do I get my client to even listen? And I'll give you an example, and this will become apparent. So an example from the medical industry of 2 medical researchers who are based in Perth in Western Australia in the 1980s. And they had a hypothesis that stomach ulcers were caused by a bacterium, and the prevailing wisdom was no, stomach ulcers are caused by stress. So if you got a stomach ulcer, you were given bed rest. It kind of helped, but that wasn't the reason. And they had no success in getting their idea published. No one wanted to hear the fact it was thought that...
Even though they'd done research,
they had all the facts, but it was thought that bacteria couldn't live in the acidic environment of the stomach, and that's impossible, and no one listened. And Barry Marshall, in frustration, I would say, did a scan of his stomach and then drank the bacteria mixed up in a potion, developed stomach ulcers, he was able to show that, and then treated himself as a human guinea pig and wrote that up. And of course, that went like crazy through the medical establishment, and Marshall and Warren won the Nobel Prize for Medicine in the year 2004 or 5, I believe.
That's right, I remember that.
Yes. Yeah. So therein is the problem with true insight. You know, I would question, do you really have an insight or not? Because true insights are not well accepted in your market. So I need a story. Now, Marshall and Warren created a story themselves.
Bit dramatic, that one.
Dramatic, but look, big companies and even medium-sized companies, they spend money on research, they commission surveys, they get information, they find insights, and they want to deliver the facts of the insight. But what's interesting is the story, and what's persuasive is the story, because you need to teach your future client how you got that insight.
That reminds me of something. Of course, people relate to anecdotes, don't they?
They do.
So, talk to people about all the research and the facts, but you give them an anecdote that supports those facts.
They listen, and they listen non-judgmentally to a story. So, what happens, this is what's happened to me when I've joined corporations and I don't understand them well. I'm seeking out insight because I've got to sell, and I get the 100-pack PowerPoint slide pack with all the facts, right? Yeah. But they don't tell me the story. So the salespeople need to do a bit of research. You need to find out, how did we find out that insight? How did we nearly fail or whatever? What's the actual journey to that? The researcher's journey, the research journey is usually one of false leads, failure, and then eureka, I've got it. Can you tell that story? Because that's what your client will listen to, and it's what they'll remember. That's the insight story.
Okay, so the bottom line for me is you know, I talk insight all the time, and I teach salespeople how to ask questions with the insight in there to really get the customer to learn through the question as much as the answers I get. Really, really important, but you're now telling me that there's a much better way for communicating that insight where it'll, one, be believed, and second, be remembered.
Yeah, a few things are happening in that insight story. Firstly, your future client is listening to understand. They're being taught by the story, because we learn from stories.
Because of the structure we discussed.
Because of the structure, and it's how we learn. We learn through stories. We learnt that there's a thing called gravity because Newton had an apple fall on his head, right? I mean, it's a story that we remember, not the inverse square law of gravity, I'm fairly sure I can say. So we're teaching and we're providing the insight facts in a way that can be accepted, will be listened to, and that's far more persuasive.
Okay, so the message out there for all our listeners here, and that can be the CEO, sales leaders, down to every salesperson. Look, guys, you need those insight stories. The companies can derive them, go back to your researchers, whoever else, to find the research-based insight and the story behind it, and build your story library. We'll talk more about story library. Make sure every salesperson knows those insight stories, because it's told at the right time through the sales process will actually really create a lot of value for you and your customer, and really position you, differentiate you very well. So thank you, Mike. Great story.
Thank you.
Look forward to the next time we get together.
Thanks, John.